I was never a city boy. My blood has always felt a little more at home where the asphalt ends and the pine needles begin. I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, a place that's just civilized enough to have a decent coffee shop but still close enough to the wild that you can smell it on the wind when it blows from the east. My work, designing websites for small businesses, is about as far from the wilderness as you can get. It's all screens and code and client emails, a life lived in the humming, air-conditioned indoors. Maybe that's why I craved the woods. It was a reality I could touch, a silence that wasn't just the absence of noise, but a presence in itself. My grandmother was the one who planted the seeds of the old knowledge in me. She was a woman from a different time, her hands mapped with the lines of a life spent tending a garden and canning vegetables. Her house always smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. She'd tell me stories on her porch swing, her voice a low, rhythmic creak that blended with the chains. They weren't bedtime stories. They were warnings. Tales of lights in the woods that led you astray. Of shapes seen from the corner of your eye, and most importantly, of the things that listen. The one rule she drilled into me, the one she'd repeat with a sternness that brooked no argument, was this: boy, you listen good. Never you whistle in the woods after the sun goes down. You hear me? You put your lips together and you blow, and you're telling everything out there exactly where you are. And worse, sometimes the forest whistles back. I was 10, maybe 11. I'd nod seriously, my young mind picturing the trees themselves puckering their bark lips and letting out a spooky tune. It was a hillbilly superstition, a fun, creepy heirloom from a less enlightened time. I cherished it the way you cherish a story about the boogeyman as something fundamentally not real. This past October, that childhood warning was a dusty memory. My friends Mark, Chloe, and I had planned a 3-day hiking trip deep into the Daniel Boone National Forest, right into the rugged, rolling foothills of the Appalachians. It was our annual escape from the digital leash. Mark, a boisterous financial analyst with a love for expensive gear, was our self-appointed leader. Chloe, a veterinarian, was the calm, observant one, the one who actually knew how to read a topographical map. And me. I was just the guy happy to be there, to feel the burn in my calves and the weight of a pack on my shoulders. The first day was perfect. The air was crisp, carrying the rich, decaying scent of autumn. Sunlight dappled through the canopy of oak and hickory, painting the forest floor in gold and green. We made good time, following a trail that was little more than a deer path in places. The banter was easy, the silence comfortable. As the light began to soften, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, we found a good spot to make camp near a chattering creek. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and as Chloe got a small, controlled blaze going, Mark pulled out a flask of bourbon. We passed it around, the warmth spreading through my chest, a pleasant counterpoint to the evening chill. The stars began to prick through the velvet blackness of the sky, far more numerous and bright than they ever were back in Lexington. It was idyllic. It was peaceful. It was the last truly normal moment I would ever have. Later, as Mark told a long, rambling story about a client, I felt the call of nature. I nodded to Chloe, pointed a thumb towards the trees, and stepped out of the circle of firelight. I walked a respectful distance, following the old rule of digging a cat hole. The business done, I turned to head back. The fire was a flickering jewel in the distance, maybe 60, 70 yards away. I could still see the silhouettes of my friends. I took a step, and then another. And then I froze. The forest around me, which a moment before had been a familiar tapestry of shadows, suddenly looked uniform. Every direction looked the same. The fire seemed to have vanished. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. I shook my head, blaming the bourbon. All right, don't be an idiot, I whispered to myself. I started walking towards where I was sure the camp was. I walked for 5 minutes. The fire didn't get any closer. The trees just got thicker, the darkness more absolute. A cold knot of panic began to tighten in my stomach. I was lost, truly, hopelessly lost, and night had fully fallen in the Appalachian foothills. The initial feeling was one of profound embarrassment. This was the kind of thing that happened to tourists, not to someone who'd spent his childhood scrambling through these very hills. I stood still, forcing myself to take slow, deep breaths. The air was cold in my lungs. I could do this. I had a general sense of direction. The creek was to the east of the camp. If I could find the creek, I could follow it back. I started moving again, my steps more deliberate, my eyes straining against the dark. The problem with being lost in a forest at night is that your mind becomes your own worst enemy. Every rustle of leaves is a bear. Every snap of a twig is a predator. My grandmother's stories, once charming fables, began to slither out of the mental box I'd kept them in. I pushed them down. This was a problem of navigation, not superstition. I was a modern man with a basic understanding of survival skills. I would be fine. After what felt like an hour of stumbling through undergrowth, my shins bruised and my jacket snagged by brambles, I had to admit I wasn't fine. I hadn't found the creek. I hadn't found the trail. I was just deeper in. The canopy was so thick here that the starlight was completely snuffed out. I was navigating by touch, my hands outstretched in front of me like a blind man. The temperature was dropping rapidly. I was wearing a decent jacket, but the cold was starting to seep into my bones. This was when the first real tremor of fear, pure and undiluted, went through me. It wasn't panic anymore. It was a deep, chilling dread. I was alone. My friends were probably already searching for me, but their chances of finding me in this pitch-black maze were slim to none. I pulled out my phone, already knowing what I would see. No service. The battery was at 45%. I turned it off to conserve the last of its power, plunging myself back into total darkness. The silence was beginning to press in on my eardrums. It was then that I remembered our signal. Earlier that day, Mark and I had developed a silly, two-note whistle to find each other if we wandered off the trail during the day. A high note, followed by a low, falling note. Asterisk I'm here asterisk. It had been a game. I fumbled for my phone again, my fingers numb with cold. Should I use the flashlight? It would drain the battery, but maybe they would see it. But before I could decide, a sound cut through the oppressive quiet. It was a whistle. It was distant, faint, but unmistakable. The two-note call. High, then low. Asterisk I'm here asterisk. Relief, so potent it made my knees weak, washed over me. It was Mark. He was out looking for me. He was using the signal. I put my lips together, took a sharp breath, and whistled back. The same two notes. Asterisk I'm here, to asterisk. I listened, my whole body tense with hope. A moment later, the reply came. Closer this time. Much closer. It was our signal, perfect and clear. He was maybe 100 yards away. Mark, I shouted, my voice cracking. Chloe, I'm here. There was no vocal response. Just the whistle again, repeating the two notes. It was a little odd, but I figured he was just being efficient, making sure he didn't lose my location. I started moving towards the sound, my earlier fear receding like a tide. I was saved. I pushed through a thicket of mountain laurel, the waxy leaves slapping against my face. The whistle came again, now from directly ahead. It sounded like it was just on the other side of a large, gnarled oak tree. Mark, you have no idea how glad I am to hear you, I called out, a laugh bubbling up in my chest. I got completely turned around. There was no answer. No crunch of footsteps. No beam of a flashlight cutting through the trees. Just silence. I stopped a dozen feet from the oak tree. Mark, I said, my voice quieter now. The relief was starting to curdle into a new, more subtle unease. Why wasn't he saying anything? Why wasn't he coming into view? Then, the whistle came again. And this time, I heard it with a clarity that froze the blood in my veins. It was our signal, yes. The exact same to pitches. But there was something wrong with it. It was hollow. It lacked the wet, living quality of a human whistle. It was flat, sterile, like a recording played back on a cheap device. It was the perfect imitation of a whistle, without any of the soul. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head, clear as if she were standing beside me. Sometimes the forest whistles back. The childish fear I had felt earlier was nothing compared to the glacial terror that now seized me. This wasn't Mark. I knew it with a primal, cellular certainty. I took a slow step backward, my eyes locked on the massive oak tree. A figure stepped out from behind it. In the profound darkness. It was little more than a tall, slender silhouette. It was roughly Mark's height, and for a split second, my brain, desperate for normality, tried to convince me it was him. But the proportions were all wrong. The arms. God, the arms. They hung down by its sides, but they were too long, the hands dangling somewhere near its knees. It stood perfectly still, a cutout of a man against the deeper black of the forest. It didn't make a sound. It didn't advance. It just stood there, and I felt its attention on me like a physical weight. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking right at me. My breath hitched in my throat, a small, terrified sound. And then, the thing did something that shattered the last of my sanity. It mimicked the sound of my hitched breath. It wasn't a perfect imitation this time. It was wet, guttural, like someone learning to use a new instrument. It was the sound of my own fear, played back to me from that silhouette. The whistle had been a lure, a sophisticated snare. This was the hunter. I didn't think. I didn't scream. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed one word: run. I spun on my heel and crashed back through the mountain laurel, no longer caring about the noise I was making, no longer caring about direction. I just had to get away. I ran blindly, my feet slipping on wet leaves, my shoulders slamming into tree trunks I couldn't see. I expected to hear pursuit, the crash of footsteps, another whistle, anything. But there was nothing. After a few minutes of frantic, panicked flight, I stumbled and fell hard, the wind knocked out of me. I lay there, gasping, my heart hammering against the forest floor. I listened, straining my ears. Nothing. No footsteps. No whistles. Just silence. But it wasn't the peaceful silence of before. This was a dead silence. An absolute void of sound. It was then I noticed the effect, the one I'd later learn has a name. The Uz effect. The forest had gone mute. Completely. There were no crickets. No rustle of nocturnal animals. No distant hoot of an owl. The wind, which had been whispering through the pines all evening, had stilled. It was as if someone had pressed a mute button on the world. The only sound was the ragged, too loud rasp of my own breathing and the frantic thumping of my heart. This utter silence was more terrifying than any sound of pursuit. It meant the forest itself was holding its breath. It meant that thing was still out there, and its presence commanded this unnatural quiet. I pushed myself up, my body screaming in protest. I had to keep moving. I started walking, then jogging, trying to be as quiet as I could in this terrifying vacuum of sound. I don't know how long I traveled like that, a ghost in a dead world. Time lost all meaning. It could have been 10 minutes or 2 hours. My mind was a scrambled mess, cycling between sheer terror, desperate hope, and the chilling memory of that long-armed silhouette. I kept checking over my shoulder, seeing nothing but shifting shadows that my mind transformed into pursuing figures. Then, a sound. It wasn't a whistle. It was a voice. It was Mark's voice. It came from my left, maybe 50 feet away. "Hey, man, over here. I see you." Hope, treacherous and bright, flared in my chest again. It sounded like him. It sounded like him. But I remembered the whistle. I froze, my body tensed for flight. "Mark," I whispered, the word barely audible. "Yeah, it's me. I got separated from Chloe. Come on. I think I found the trail back." The voice was calm, reassuring. It was Mark's cadence, his pitch. But something was off. It was the same flatness, the same lack of resonance I'd heard in the whistle. It was a recording of Mark's voice, not the living, breathing man. It was a performance. "You're not him," I said, my voice trembling. There was a pause. Then, the voice came again, but this time it was different. It was my voice. "You're right. I'm not. But come over here anyway. I'm scared." It was a perfect imitation of my own voice, the one I heard in my head every day. But it was laced with a fake, simpering fear that I never would have used. It was a mockery. The sound of my own voice, used as a weapon against me, broke something inside. I turned and ran again, not away from the voice, but perpendicular to it, changing my direction entirely. I heard it call out once more, this time in Chloe's voice, a pleading, "Please, help me." But it was already fading behind me, another discarded tool. My flight was no longer blind. A new, cold clarity had settled over me. The terror was still there, a constant, icy companion, but it had been joined by a fierce, desperate will to survive. This thing, whatever it was a mimic. It used your own sounds, your own people, against you. It preyed on connection and hope. I couldn't trust my ears. I could only trust the primal fear screaming in my gut. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. The Uz effect persisted. The world was still wrapped in that suffocating, unnatural silence. It was its way of hunting, I realized. By silencing the world, it made its own lures the only thing you could hear, the only beacon in the sensory deprivation tank of the night. I found a large fallen log and scrambled underneath it, pressing my body into the damp, rotten leaves and earth. It was a poor hiding place, but I had to stop. I had to rest. I lay there, shivering, listening to the deafening silence. I pulled out my phone. 8% battery. A terrible choice presented itself. I could use the flashlight to try and get my bearings, to maybe find a landmark, but the light would be a beacon for it. Or I could save the battery, stay in the dark, and remain lost. I decided to risk a single, brief flash. I cupped my hand over the light, pointed it at the ground, and turned it on for a single second dot. In that 1 second burst of illumination, I saw two things. First, I saw that I was in a small gully thick with ferns. Second, and this sight will be etched into my memory until the day I die, I saw a pair of legs standing 20 feet away. They were partially obscured by the ferns, but I could see they were too thin, and the feet were bare and caked with dirt. They were facing away from me. I snapped the light off, my heart in my throat. Had it seen me? I held my breath, praying the thing hadn't noticed the fleeting glow. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, I heard a soft, shuffling sound. It wasn't walking, it was adjusting its stance. And then a low, wet, clicking sound began, like two stones being knocked together deep in its throat. It was a new sound, one it hadn't mimicked. This was its own sound. The clicking stopped. And then, the most horrifying sound of all began. It started to mimic the ragged, panicked rhythm of my own breathing, the very breaths I was trying so hard to quiet. It was a perfect, real-time echo of my terror, amplified just enough for me to hear it. It was telling me it knew I was there. It was playing with me. That was the final straw. A raw, guttural scream tore from my throat. I erupted from under the log and scrambled up the side of the gully. I didn't look back. I ran like I have never run before, fueled by pure, undiluted adrenaline. I crashed through the forest, branches whipping my face, thorns tearing at my clothes. I didn't care. I had one goal: put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. I don't know what guided me. Luck, fate, or some dormant instinct. But after an eternity of running, I saw a flicker of light through the trees. Not a cold, electronic light, but the warm, dancing glow of a fire. I heard a voice, a real, human voice, shouting my name. It was Chloe. I sobbed, pushing my body beyond its limits. I burst into the clearing of our camp, collapsing at Chloe's feet, babbling and weeping. The hike out the next morning was a somber affair. Mark had, in fact, been searching for me in a different direction and had returned to camp only an hour before I did. They had heard my scream, which is what prompted Chloe to start shouting. My story poured out of me in a disjointed, hysterical torrent. The getting lost, the whistle, the silhouette, the long arms, the mimicked voices and breathing. They listened. Mark, ever the pragmatist, looked uneasy. Chloe, with her scientific mind, was gently skeptical. They suggested I'd had a panic attack, a common enough occurrence when lost in the woods. The mind plays tricks, they said. You heard an animal, maybe a fox, whose cry can sound like a human whistle. The silhouette was a trick of the shadows. The as effect, just your adrenaline-heightened senses focusing on the threat, filtering out the background noise. It was a perfect, rational explanation, and I could see in their eyes that they truly believed it. I wanted to believe it, too. God, how I wanted to. I spent the next week in a haze, jumping at every sound. I saw a therapist who specialized in trauma. She diagnosed me with a temporary psychotic episode brought on by extreme stress and situational anxiety. It made sense. It was a clean, clinical explanation. I clung to it. I went back to my life. I went back to my screens, my code, the humming, predictable safety of the indoors. I tried to convince myself that my grandmother's stories were just that, stories. For a few weeks, it almost worked. The sharp edges of the memory began to soften, blurred by the comforting monotony of daily life. I started sleeping through the night again. The sight of trees outside my window no longer sent a jolt of fear through me. I was healing. I was moving on. And then, one night, it all came crashing down. I was in my second-floor apartment in Lexington, a good 2-hour drive from those mountains. The city sounds were a constant, reassuring hum outside my window, cars, distant sirens, the chatter of people. I was lying in bed, reading, on the verge of sleep. I had just turned out the light and settled into the pillows. That's when I heard a faint, but piercingly clear, cutting through the urban drone from the street below my window. A 2-note whistle. High, then low. I'm here. My body went rigid. The blood turned to ice in my veins. It wasn't possible. It was a kid, I told myself, a drunk person walking home, a bird. It had to be. I lay there, barely breathing, listening with every fiber of my being. The normal night sounds of the city continued. A dog barked. A car alarm whooped once and was silenced. Then, it came again. Closer this time, right under my window. It was the same flat, hollow, recorded-sounding whistle. The one that didn't belong to any human. It was a sound that had no right to exist outside of those cursed mountains. A soft, scraping sound followed, like long, hard fingernails dragging slowly down the brickwork of my apartment building. My breath caught in my throat, a small, terrified squeak, and from the darkness outside my window, I heard it. A wet, guttural, perfectly mimicked echo of that very sound. It's been here for 3 months now. It doesn't come every night. Sometimes a week will go by, and I'll start to hope it's finally gone, that it lost interest. But then, just as I'm drifting off, the whistle will come. It's learned new tricks. Sometimes it uses Chloe's voice, begging me to let her in. Sometimes it uses my grandmother's voice, repeating her old warning in that same stern tone. Last night, it used my own voice, whispering my thoughts back to me from the other side of the door. I don't sleep much anymore. I've put bars on my windows. I sleep with the lights on. The police think I'm a paranoid lunatic. My friends have stopped calling. I've lost my job. My world has shrunk to these four walls and the terror that waits outside. My grandmother was right. It's not a superstition. It's a rule for survival. I broke it. I whistled in the woods after dark, and the forest didn't just whistle back. It followed me home. And I know, with a certainty, that is my only companion now, that it's not going to leave. It's just waiting for me to get so tired, so desperate, that I'll finally open the door and answer its call.